Let's go over the directions for day 2 of our dragon eye project. Last time we learned how to draw a dragon eye, and today let's go over how to start adding color to our dragon eye. So we discussed last time what dragon eyes look like. We learned that dragons are mythical creatures. We can imagine that they would have a scaly texture and vibrant blended colors with a variety of values. Let's go over a couple different ways to use color to make your dragon eye look its very best. So we can use analogous colors, which are next to each other on the color wheel, and these colors work best for blending together. So for example, you could blend the analogous colors yellow-orange, yellow, and yellow-green together, and they would blend very smoothly together because they are analogous or very similar, and they sit next to each other on the color wheel. We'll also be using a value in our project. Value is the amount of light or dark in a color, and you can add value by layering and blending colors. So in this example, where are the darker values? If you said around the edges of objects, like around the edges of the scales and the edges of the eye, then you are right. By adding darker values around things, we can give the illusion that they are not flat and that they are actually 3D, even though this is drawn on a flat piece of paper. One idea for adding value is color in your shapes with marker first. Then add value around the edges with a darker analogous color using crayon or colored pencil. We'll also try to use complementary colors in our artwork. And complementary colors are across from each other on the color wheel. And when they're used together, they make each other stand out. So for example, orange and blue are across from each other on the color wheel. If you look at the example of the dragon eye here, the eye is mostly yellows and oranges, but then the scales directly around it are lots of blues and purples, which make each other stand out because they are opposite. So when you pick a color for your eye, try to pick contrasting, or also known as complementary colors, for the scales around your eye shape. Now let's review the directions for day 2 of our dragon eye. For your supplies today, you'll need your project from last week. You'll probably need the dragon eye drawing guide that has ideas, possibly a pencil and a black Sharpie if you're still drawing and outlining your dragon eye, and then some coloring materials. I will go over how to use a combination of markers, colored pencils, and crayons for your dragon eye, and you can pick what you think works best. First, finish drawing and outlining your dragon eye if you need to, and then color in your dragon eye and the scales around it. Remember to keep in mind analogous colors and complementary colors when you do this. After, you can use value shading and color blending to show dimension and give the illusion that your dragon eye is 3-dimensional even though it's on a flat piece of paper. Alright artist, let's go ahead and see how I made my dragon eye. So let's go over how to add color to your dragon eye. Once you finish drawing in pencil and then outlining with a black marker, you can go ahead and start thinking about how you'll add color to your dragon eye. When we're adding color, we want to focus on a couple different things, using contrast and using value with analogous colors. So we learned that contrast or complementary colors are colors that are opposite from each other. So for example, this eye is blue and the scales around it will be a variety of warm colors. That will make the blue of the eye really stand out. You could do it the opposite way too, with a warm colored eye and then cool colors for your scales. When we're coloring in all of our scale shapes, we want to focus on using value with our colors. So you can do this with a couple different materials. Crayons will work because you can press hard on them to get a dark value and let go to get a medium value, and then lightly press on them to get a light value. Remember that value means the amount of dark or light in a color. You could do the same thing with a colored pencil. Press hard to get a dark value, medium amount of pressure to get a medium value, and then barely press down to get a light value. Notice that on these scale shapes, around the edges are darker values, and in the center is a lighter value. I'm going to show you a couple different combinations of materials that you can use to get the same effect. So one combination of materials that you can use is markers. You can color with a color of marker first. Then you can go back around the edges with a crayon or colored pencil. You'd want to let this part dry for a couple minutes because markers are made of ink, and if I immediately go over it with a crayon or colored pencil, it might actually rip the paper. So I'm going to let that sit there for a minute or two and I will come back to it. Another thing you could use is just crayon or colored pencil, and you could lightly color in all of the scales a color. So let's say all of these are going to be orange. I'm just adding a medium value of orange on top of these scales. I'm just coloring them all in at once. That's a little bit of a quicker way to do it because I know this whole section is going to be orange. So I could go through and color all of that in. Then I could find a darker orange crayon or a red crayon, something that is an analogous color to orange, which we learned are colors that sit next to each other on the color wheel. And I'm going around the edge of each scale shape with that darker analogous color. So that way the shapes really pop out and it adds a little bit of texture and makes it look a little three-dimensional because I'm adding a shadow around the edges. So you would want to go through and do that to each scale shape to really make them pop out. You can see the difference between the ones that don't have the edges darker and the ones that do. These really stand out and these do not. Another option is using colored pencil to pretty much do the same thing that we did with the crayon. So color in your scales with a colored pencil, just with a medium value, not too light, not too dark. And again, I could color all of these in yellow because I know I'm gonna go all the way across with my color. Then finding a darker analogous color to that yellow. So I have a yellow orange and I'm blending that in around the edges, just going around the sides, the top and the bottom, and blending it into the lighter yellow. Now my marker has dried up here. The next thing I can do is find an analogous color to this pink. So I have a red crayon and I can color on top of the marker since it's dry, and I'm just gonna add red along the edges. Notice how the red really makes the shape of the scale pop out. So I'm going around the entire shape and just adding a little bit of red around it. For this example, I'm using cool colors on my scales, and for the eye, instead of using a cool color like this example, I'm going to use a warm color. So here's how you can color in your eye color. Your pupil shape should be colored in black. Your reflections should be left white. So notice how these are white and I colored around them. I'm going to do a yellowy orange eye for this one. So I'm going to color in with a marker and fill in this shape. I'm using a regular yellow marker for this, and I'm going to add some darker values with different yellow oranges and maybe a little bit of red around the edges. So I'm going to go ahead and fill all of this in with yellow. You could do this with a crayon or colored pencil as well. For any other sections next to the eye, like these two white sections on each side, I'm going to also color those in a shade of yellow. I'm going to color in the corners with a darker yellow because those might have a little more value because they're in the corner, so there might be more of a shadow there. Now I colored in my eye with marker, and I'm going to let that dry before I add any shading with crayon or colored pencil. So I'm going to go ahead and color in the rest of the sections of scales with some different shades of blues and purples. So my plan for this eye is that it's all cool colors. So I have greens and then blues and then a little more blue on the other side and then purple. But you can pick any colors that you like. Just remember to make your eye stand out from your scales. So I'm going to go ahead and color in the sections of the scales all at once. So I'm coloring in all of these scale shapes nearest the eye at one time. That way it goes a little bit quicker. And remember that you can do this with crayon or colored pencil too. I'm just choosing to use marker. Now I'll go ahead and fill in the other sections. Now that the marker on my eye has dried, I can go ahead and add some shading around the edges. I'm going to use crayons for this, but you could also use colored pencil. And in the corner, I'm going to use a darker orange to add some shading. Remember, our focus when we add color is showing value. So by adding the shading, you are showing value. Now in the other parts of the eye, I can add some orange on the edges. Remember, the edges of things should be a little bit darker so that they really pop out and look more three-dimensional. In the middle, I'm just lightly pressing down with my crayon so that I can still see some of the marker through. Now for the center of the eye, I'm going to add shading around the entire shape, and then I'm going to add some lines on the inside going towards the pupil. So I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit of this orange around the edges. Now that I've added shading around the eye shape, I'm going to add lines that start from the edges and go towards the pupil. And I'm starting at the edge and drawing my line towards the pupil and slowly letting go of my pressure so that my line is darker here and it fades towards the pupil. So the lines start at an angle and they go around in a circle shape. When you do this, be careful of your reflection shape and remember to keep that white. So you're going to need to skip your reflection and then add color after it. The more you do this, the more realistic your eye will look. Notice for this blue eye, I used a darker blue crayon to do the same thing. So this will work for any color, just pick a darker analogous shade. Now I'm going to add shading to the rest of the scale shapes. Remember, when you go to add shading, you should have colored in your scale a color. So like, for example, these are all colored in one shade of blue with marker. And you could do this with marker, crayon, colored pencil, whatever you like. If you use marker, remember to let it dry before you add the shading on top. It just takes a couple minutes. And then you're going to add shading with a crayon or a colored pencil on the edges. So I'm using a black colored pencil here because the blue is a pretty dark color. So for dark colors, I would probably use a black for shading. And I'm just adding that value around the edges. You could go ahead and do this all the way through. So if I go all the way along the edge of the blue shapes here, then I can do that top area all at once, and that goes a little bit quicker than working individually on each scale. So I'm going all the way through, adding just a little bit of a shadow around the edges. Then I'll go ahead and add a little bit on each side of the scale and blend it into the middle. And that's just really gonna make those pop out more than the ones without the shading. So you wanna go ahead and add shading to all of your scale shapes. And this may take some time, but we want our artwork to look our very best and for it to look realistic. Okay, so I am all done adding color and value to my scales. Notice that all of my scale shapes have some shading around them, whether the shading is with black or it's with a dark blue because my scales are blue. Remember, your drawing is not complete until you show value, which you can do through shading around the edges of your scale shapes, as well as around the eye shape. I can't wait to see your awesome dragon eyes. Have fun, artists!